of the fucking car now!
Help! God! Help! Leave me alone! Hey, my son! What are you doing to me? What are you doing to me?
I'm gonna try. Sorry?
What are you doing to me? I have my son in the car! I have my son in the car! Help! 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 What are you doing to me? I have my son in the car!
Oh my God!
I was doing nothing!
What are you doing to him, buddy?
On your stomach! On your stomach! I was doing nothing! On your stomach!
Get off him!
With my son! Help!
Look what you're doing to the kid, guys!
Doing this is abuse! Ah! I was just sitting in my car with my son! What are you doing? What are you... Oh, son, I'm so sorry! This is so wrong! This is absolutely wrong! My name...
You guys should be ashamed of yourselves!
I've done nothing wrong! I've done nothing wrong! I have done nothing wrong! This is abuse! This is abuse! I'm sitting in the car reading with my son! What are you doing? Charlie, I am so sorry, son! Charlie, I'm so sorry, I've done nothing! I have done nothing! I picked him up from daycare! What are you doing?
I don't want your custody.
Just want to explain what you saw there at Trout Lake Park in Vancouver on October 11th, 2022. The Vancouver police drove up to this young dad who was parked in his vehicle reading a book to his son. This young dad was going through a divorce, and his ex-partner claimed that he had sent some inappropriate text messages to her. From what we understand, there was no threats at all, no threats of violence of any sort. But the young woman went to find a lawyer. The lawyer worked with the judge, which it was called a family law cartel, and they made some orders. The reason this was done and allowed to happen is sort of complex, but not complex. The federal government of Canada runs our judicial system. So the federal government creates the laws, creates what's called the acts that judges are supposed to follow, but also the federal government appoints all Supreme Court judges for family court. And then the provincial court, which also does family law, follows the lead of the federal courts, so the Supreme Courts, which again is all controlled by the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office, the PMO's office. Again, they appoint all the judges. So it's to understand what family law is and to understand the scope of family law, to understand that the amount of money involved is absolutely mind-boggling. So this is an industry that is bigger than criminal law and business law combined. It produces billions upon billions of dollars every year for the federal government and for their friends. And this is done by extracting money from parents. So what happens is the federal government has told the judges and made the laws in such a way that when a man becomes divorced in Canada, they're automatically a criminal. They're automatically considered bad. And then the female is encouraged to go to court by the judges and by the lawyers, I should say. But the lawyers know that the judges condone, support, and reward false accusations, and as many accusations as possible. Now, the federal government doesn't necessarily hate men because the federal government is made of men. It's all made of white, liberal men. But and of course, now that the federal government is trying to create this idea of diversity, so now they're accepting of handicapped white people and female white people, which is essentially their family members. And then they try to hire some diversity in color, but they give these people of color no power. So they're just, they stick a few colored folks in the picture to make it look like there's diversity. But that's straying from the lines a little bit. Essentially, the federal government is hooked on this drug called money. And they get this money from families. Because when families get divorced, this kid, he's young, he probably doesn't have that much money, but most people that get divorced are usually in their late 30s into their 40s, sometimes into their 50s, such as I was. And this is when you have a lot of money saved up. So the federal government knows that you have a lot of money saved up. In my case, I had about $300,000 plus. That's after division of assets 50-50. So that's a fair chunk of money that the federal government wants to get their hands on. So even though in my case I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I never sent any text messages that were inappropriate to my ex-partner, and I have no criminal history whatsoever. Yet I was forced to go to family court, Supreme Family Court in US. I spent over 75 days in court, in the courthouse. And now that wasn't always in front of a judge, but that was, between research, filing applications, handing my black book in, self-representing, hiring many lawyers to fight for my case. And it took me many years to figure out it was just a scheme by the federal government, a kangaroo court, a highly corrupt system to extract as much money as they could from me, using my children as um, what would you call it, extortion. So they kept me from my children and make me repeatedly go to court and pay between $300-$400 per hour. And as I understand it now, I just was involved with a university program here, bunch of law students from Ontario, and the facilitator of the program had mentioned it is now between $350 and $700 per hour to get a lawyer, and that a 5-day trial now is $80,000. I was told by my lawyer if I wanted to get joint custody of my own children, I would have to pay at that time $40,000 and have a 5-day trial. Now, I imagine it would have been a much more, but the lawyers did get about $100,000 out of me. End of the day, I did get to see my children probably about, I don't know, maybe 60 days of the year, maybe 50 days of the year for many years. And then the last 3.5 years, I have had no access to my own sons. This video is important in that the Vancouver police here were being instructed on a family law matter based on some text messages, and then they were taking time out for the day. Instead of finding criminals, real criminals, and taking down real criminals, they were taking down fathers on instruction from the federal government, and the federal government's highly corrupt judicial system, highly corrupt judges that they appoint. And this dad was being separated from his own child under the guise of protecting the mom from some sort of arbitrary violence. But remember, the mom is nowhere near the situation here. The mom is at home, safe in her house, and the father just wants to be with his child. But the federal government realizes the power is with separating the dad from his child, because they know the bond a dad has with his child is absolutely monumental, and the dad will go to any lengths to make sure he sees his child, to be a part of his child's life. I mean, that's what we live for, is our kids, right? And so the federal government, with their really sick people in the back room, really sick, twisted liberals, have created this whole idea that men are criminals when they go to court. So they know women will be angry about divorce and separation and vengeful, and they know these emotions exist. So they create a forum, and it's called family law, where they can get out all their anger, all their evilness, by not allowing the dad to be in the children's lives. Like, the children are a possession to be fought over. And family law judges promote this heavily. It's just over the top how disgusting our family law system is, and how creepy these old white creepy judges are. I don't want to go into detail, but I was approached by a young fella out of Kamloops one time, and he was doing this protest. Approached me on Facebook and saw that I was an advocate, and he had told me that he had worked as a male prostitute, an underage male prostitute, and one of the people he prostituted to was a judge. Some years later, he had been to court for some whatever reason, and he recognized this judge as being the one that had sex with him, male on male, underage sex. So I won't dive into that too much about how gross our system is and who runs it. And people will say, well, that's, hearsay and that. And you'll never be able to prove that. But I do, and I can prove that the federal government has hired judges to separate children from their dads. And whether they do this to create dysfunction so they can have more meat, more, opportunity to have a dysfunctional society where they can prey on children for their own sick joys. Because you got to remember, a lot of this came out of the Catholic Church, right? Trudeau still advertises that he is a devout Catholic, etc. And we know that a lot of our church and state was not separated up until a few years ago, and now it's only separated in the ideology, but not separated in from the people who still believe that there is no issue with having sex with children, that males should be allowed to have sex with young children under the old Catholic sort of regime, right? And that's kind of a complicated thing, but what's not complicated is the federal government making billions upon billions of dollars, tax dollars, infusing money into our economy through their family law court system, where they arbitrarily find any little excuse, any opportunity to separate dads from their children, knowing they'll go to any lengths to be in their children's lives. I mean, again, that's what we live for as dads. I personally went through a dozen years of being a part of the family law system. I was introduced to many layers of the cartel, whether it be the lawyers, who almost every lawyer knows the family law system is broken. Again, I was paid to do to share some of my story with some Ontario University students some weeks back. Anything to do with law is just monumental amounts of money. I spoke at that seminar for probably a total of maybe 45 minutes, and I was paid $600 for my time. So I made $600 in 45 minutes. This gives you an idea of how lucrative family law is. And again, I paid on the other side of that, to be a part of my children's lives. I paid over $100,000 to lawyers and judges through fees and such to be a part of my children's lives. And again, lawyers make between $350 and $700 per hour, creating an adversarial playing field where dads have to fight tooth and nail to be in their children's lives. Now, this young dad at Trout Lake Park, who you can hear the police officer at the end of the video there say that he was enforcing some kind of no contact order on behalf of the wife. Now, again, the no contact order shouldn't be about a dad not seeing his child, even if the highly corrupt judges want to use the excuse of some text messages going, and apparently there was some text messages that this young dad had sent to his ex-partner. Very common. But it doesn't work the other way. My ex-partner physically assaulted me. One time she grabbed my cell phone when I came to see my kids. She grabbed my cell phone, reached into my truck, and started grabbing things out of my truck and throwing them on the ground. And then when I tried to grab my cell phone, because I had all my work contacts on there, and I figured she was going to run away with it, I held the door, and she physically assaulted me as she was trying to get my cell phone. I reported that to police, and nothing was done about it. So the finally our cartel has decided that men will be the ones, because in society we like to think of men as evil, right? The boogeyman, you know, is everything is man, right? So it's much easier for the federal government to sell Justin Trudeau, he's the head of the cartel right now, to sell the idea that all men are evil. So the family law system arbitrarily paints this picture. And I will do another video on how the CBC has been caught facilitating, promoting what's called Misandry, the hatred of men. And they do this to create this ideology that all men, when they get divorced, are violent and evil. And in this way, they can separate parents from their own children without any sort of pushback from society. And a lot of people don't understand just how corrupt and how lucrative family law is in our system. So what's going to happen here is this dad now is going to have to fight and fight and fight in the court system to see his children. And they'll use this video against him and say that he was resisting arrest. But you can see here, if the police had taken a different approach and they had his vehicle blocked in, he wasn't going anywhere, and those hedges in the front. If they would have just chatted with them and explained the situation, there would have not been this problem. In, what was it, roughly 20, I forget what year it was, but I had legal access, which I paid, again, tens and tens of thousands of dollars to see my own children, to the cartel. And there was an order written that I get to see my children every second weekend for the whole weekend. One weekend I went to get my kids, and my ex-partner said, "No, you're not going to see the kids." And I said, "Well, you're breaking what's called an order by a judge," which I paid damn good money to get. Uh, and she said, "So what? I can do what I want to do," right? Because she knew that as the mom and the cartel, the lawyers and the judges and the federal government would approve of this kind of conduct. And so I phoned the Vancouver police. I was living in Vancouver. My kids were living in Vancouver at the time with their mom. And the police came and said, "Well, too bad. She doesn't want to let you see your kids, and there's nothing we're going to do about it." And I did capture that on video, just to show people how it's sort of biased, but it's not biased by accident. It's biased by design, and that is to create men as the villain. And the federal government has done this kind of gender separation program. Yeah, I could go on about how the federal government has also paid numerous organizations. I think, like, there's the organization that promote gender violence ideology, that only men are violent. When we know this isn't true. Many women have murdered their own children. Many women are violent. I mean, they usually do it in a different way, whether stabbing or poison or whatever. Through the ages, they've always been on par with violence. They do it in a different way because they're typically smaller stature, smaller in size, but just as evil. But Justin Trudeau and his cartel and part of the cartel is the CBC, has sold the idea that men are violent and men should have to pay to see their own children, and pay huge dollars. And that's what's going to happen to this young dad, who is now being cut off from his children. And I do have to make mention here that the Vancouver police should not be getting involved. They should not be enforcing these orders on behalf of the family law system, because the family law system is civil, falls under civil law, and the police should only be enforcing criminal orders. But, that's kind of a different story, how the people at the top of the Vancouver Police Department, highly, highly corrupt, highly secretive. They have fought all my FOI requests, Freedom of Information requests, for documents. Apparently, they provided something to the CBC and something to Global, who ran this story, but they should be providing this to any researcher, which I am. I'm a family law researcher, have been for many years after my trials and tribulations with the family law system, after I've had friends that have male friends who have committed suicide because of the family law system, and how essentially corrupt it is, and how profit driven it is, and how intentionally adversarial it is. And it bullies males. But more so than that is it fractures the family. It rips families apart. So we now have all these children growing up without dads. And there has been much talk that pedophiles prey upon families that are fractured. And again, I had a young guy approach me on Facebook who was doing a protest in Kamloops, who said he was pimped out to a judge. Now, he didn't say, I don't know if it was a federal or a provincial judge, but he was pimped out to a judge while he was underage to a male judge. So, I don't think all judges are evil. I just think probably 90% of them are very, very profit driven, and and they fracture families in the name of profit and in the name of maybe keeping other judges happy. It only takes a few rotten apples in a bunch to contaminate all the rest. But yeah, this is a really sad story, and many of these stories are not caught on camera, but this is what Canadian dads go through every single day of the week. And I was there in that the Vancouver police separated me from my children, even though I had court orders saying that was supposed to get access to my kids after paying the family law cartel tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of dollars, and going to trip after trip to the courthouse, providing evidence saying, my ex-partner is making false allegations. I have audio of it. I have video of it. Many times with entrapment, trying to invite me into her house when there was orders on me. And of course, I didn't go in her house. That was entrapment. And also claiming attempted child abduction on me, which I proved was fake because I had the recording. But again, I would have to go to court over and over and over again, and being just emotionally and financially raped by the court system and the judges and the lawyers who just profit off this so incredibly. Can you imagine? So you're a dad, as I was, and I went to take my son to a pediatrician that was very close to the school in location. And some months later, I mean, this is months later, I get a summons at my door saying that I'm being charged by the family court system, the civil court system, with attempted child abduction. So you think, well, what's the big deal, right? It's family court, it's a bit of a joke, but it's not, because the real palpable thing is the money coming out of my pocket as I have to fight these trumped up charges. Now, I proved it was not true. I had notes from the doctor. I had a note from the doctor saying, I missed the appointment. This was the appointment date. This is the day I went to my son's school to pick up my kid, as this dad had picked up his kid from daycare, just to spend some time. But I had to go to court and fight to against these false allegations, and I wasn't compensated in any way, because this is not about right and wrong. This is about extortion, the family court system extorting money, and it was absolutely emotionally devastating. Now I've been through the court system for 12 plus years, and I realized that civil family court is a bit of a joke. And I've had people say, well, just ignore it, don't even go to court. But they drag you into the courtroom over and over and over again, and the judges literally pat the mums on the back for these false allegations, for trumping up this idea that all of a sudden, you live with a partner for years and years and years, and there was no violence, there was no criminal history, there was no reason to be scared, and then all of a sudden a divorce happens, and now all of a sudden the mom's claiming all these allegations about you. And that's one thing, but the other thing is they use these allegations to keep you from your child, which is in absolutely no danger. It's kind of interesting now in that what happens sometimes is parents get so frustrated and so stressed out from literally, a decade. So, but some people break sooner. And I almost broke. I almost committed suicide in 2013 because of the family law system. But some parents do break, and there was a mom who was being separated from her children arbitrarily in New Westminster, and she smothered her child with a pillow. You're having a lot of murder suicides. Almost every murder suicide in Canada is directly related to family law extortion, where the family law system is arbitrarily separating the children from one parent or the other. And mostly they separate from the dads because society is a little more accepting to that, right? Again, the boogeyman theory. All men are boogeymen, and it looks bad for the liberals who run the family law cartel system to be too oppressive to women. But truly, the liberals do not care, and they're destroying this country. There's a saying, war is peace. So they started what's called a gender war within Canada. So they pit women against men. But what they're doing is they're fracturing the family. Um, it's horrible. There's something called misandry, that's the hatred of men, and misogyny, the hatred of women. The federal government pays organizations to create gender hate in this country, and they pay women's groups to have as much hate towards men as possible. And even if they don't have hate, they're getting paid, so they got to create hate. They got to create and manipulate to create this friction within our country. And I understand that war is peace and it keeps people busy to some degree, but I do think it's eroding confidence in government, and it's eroding what's called the family, and it's eroding our trust in our judicial system. And I do believe it's having a massive backlash in our society. And me, like myself, after a dozen years of going through our judicial system, I have lost all faith in our judicial system. Our judicial system is as corrupt as any other corrupt judicial system in the world. It is not as it appears. And yeah, it's rotten and it's wrong. And I really am so concerned for my country. And you see this uprising in our society right now. And I mean, I do read a lot about history, and I guess, back in some, older times and in some countries, we see that there's huge oppression, and there's no, human rights are non-existent to a large degree, but we're seeing more and more of that sort of hidden in Canada, hidden in our judicial system. And the more I'm involved and the more I study our judicial system, the more rotten I see it is. And then what happens is you have sort of the social outcome of the social cancer of our judicial system spreading throughout society. And that manifests into the homelessness that's happening right now, and into the epic drug overdose problems. Like, there's just so many people doing drugs. They're so depressed, and they're so fractured, the families, and there's no safety net for people that do drugs to even find their families. Like, I don't even know where my kids are. I haven't seen my sons now for 3.5 years. I haven't heard from them. I don't know what they're doing. I do know I did get a call from the Vancouver police that, and from Crown Council in Vancouver, that my son is now, my oldest one, even though he's still considered juvenile, is involved in the criminal system now. Even though, again, I don't smoke, I don't drink, and I've never had any criminal history, and I've never shown or would want my child to have any kind of involvement with what's called the criminal system, even though, family law is criminal, but somehow they skirt that because they make the laws. They are the law, so how can they call themselves criminals, right? But but speaking of the social fallout of our judicial system, our highly corrupt judicial system, you see, all the dysfunction growing day after day after day. And, right now we have um, violence is growing, assaults are growing, murder is growing. And I want to speak a bit about that too. The federal government of Canada, I do know a person recently who was charged with armed robbery, and a judge somehow let that guy go with absolutely no charge whatsoever, like no conviction, nothing on the record. And I believe what that is the federal government are trying to manipulate, the judicial system is trying to manipulate because it's all political. We have a federal election coming up, and the Liberals want to claim that violence is going down and crimes are going down under their leadership. So what they're doing right now is they're told the judges not to charge or not to convict violent crimes right now, such as armed robbery, for the illusion that the Liberals are bringing down the rate of crime through their policies and way of doing business. This is really, really sick on the part of the Liberals. And I can say with certainty this is happening right now because I saw it. I saw the case against this person for at least some kind of criminal um, penalty, and the judge gave no penalty, and there's no record. You'll never find the record of this person that the Vancouver police charged with armed robbery. I went to Crown Council with the suggestion of armed robbery, which Crown Council downplayed it to assault with a weapon, and then a judge completely released it, and there is no record. And then when I tried to get that record, the judge refused to release anything. So this is coming from the federal government to make the illusion that crime is going down for the next little while, and that's because we have an election coming up. But yeah, getting back onto this video, this is essentially the family law cartel in doing their best to separate families, to fracture families, to keep families broken, and make them pay between $350 and $700 per hour of time to fight in family law courts to see their own children. And this young dad is now on his path to the hellish world of family law corruption. All right, I just want to touch on part 2 here of the Trout Lake video. So after the Trout Lake video came out, someone contacted the CBC, obviously a judge or somebody within the cartel, and said, we got to minimize this video. It's just getting too many views. So what they did is they put out what looks like a news article, but it's actually a attack against this Sean fella that posted the video, and it's attack against the dad that's being beat up by the Vancouver police. And it is a promotion for the family law industry all in one. And of course, the CBC is owned by the federal government of Canada, which makes this alarming. This came out within 1 day of Sean posting that video of the police. So the CBC puts out this, what looks like a news article, but it is just innuendo to paint that dad is a horrific monster. In this whole article, the only thing they could find against that dad was the fact that he had sent some text messages to his former spouse. And they weren't even threatening text messages, but the judge, the cartel member, decided that was good enough reason to make a protection order, and then that protection order was used to keep from his child. And then, of course, the police were called to beat up the dad. Now you can see this is a family law lawyer here. The CBC has also done some promotion for this Kendra Ashton, who specializes in family law and child protection. It's a massive industry. So the CBC is doing something really, really sick here. It's a brutal attack. Okay, so the man's abusive text to former spouse amount to family violence against their daughter. So somehow, this doesn't even make any sense, right? So somehow text messages to his spouse, his former spouse, amount to violence against the child. Just such a huge stretch. But this is how the cartel works. This is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. So the CBC was contacted within a day to put out what's supposed to present like a news story, but it is advertising for the family law cartel. Look at this. They talk about bullets and death and all kinds of horrible things. And they paste this right onto this young father, just beyond words, just how sick our judicial system is and how sick our liberals are. Anyways, this has raised attention, and I'm not the only one that notices this. The CBC doing what looks like advertising, or looks like news articles, but as actually advertising. So I'm going to read you something here. So a senator put this out. The amendment to Bill C-11 proposed by Senator Percy says the CBC cannot broadcast or develop quotations an advertisement or announcement on behalf of an advertiser that is designed to resemble journalistic programming. I'll read that again. An advertisement or announcement on behalf of an advertiser that is designed to resemble journalistic programming. So the CBC has been accused of this many, many times. Basically, it's propaganda, as the CBC is just a lying propaganda monster that causes so much grief in our society. So again, this has been an ongoing concern, and this is why people are saying, we got to defund the CBC, because we can't vote the liberals out. They're too powerful. We can't vote the judges out, because you can't vote a judge out in Canada. Judge can do anything they want. They have a job for life, and they can do all kinds of horrible things, as we know judges do, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's absolutely terrifying, our country and what has become of it. And I think a lot of people, I love the CBC to a large degree, but I have huge amounts of concerns with some of the horrible things the CBC are doing. And this basically fake news is what it is. This is our country. This is our national newspaper putting out fake attack ads against citizens and promoting hate and misandry and family law, promoting this monster that's taking lives every year, that's putting people into bankruptcy, that is causing so much social cancer, separating children from parents and parents from children arbitrarily, right? Yeah, I just can't say enough. But anyways, the CBC has within one day come out and attack this video. So we know there's a lot of truth in this video when the CBC would do something like this. And then Bill C-11 is trying to raise awareness and put an end to the CBC used as a propaganda machine for the federal government.
Quick update to November 22 regarding the 3 police officers that emotionally and physically assaulted a young dad in front of his child at Trout Lake Park in October of 2022. We've got, and then the audio recording evidence that was provided to the Vancouver Police regarding a separate matter in which the Vancouver Police ignored a child rape. They ignored the evidence, possibly on behalf of a very powerful Catholic family. We've contacted the Vancouver police, numerous agencies within, and none have responded. We've contacted the Vancouver Police Board. They have ignored all requests for information and answers, and the Vancouver Police are still refusing to disclose if it was truly a criminal order they were following and was the reason they beat this dad up, or whether it was a family law civil order, which are handed out like candy in the highly for-profit corrupt family court system. So I guess they're caught kind of in a bind right now, so they've chosen just to ignore. So they've ignored all FOI requests, which by law I don't think they're allowed to, but the Vancouver Police, yeah, they kind of have their own rules. It's a highly separated organization from the federal RCMP, so they really answer to nobody except dirty politicians within. So a little explanation of what the Vancouver Police Board is. It is a board designed to essentially cover the ass of the police. It's to give the illusion that there is third-party accountability. So what they do is they advertise that they hire, diversity such as women and different cultures within the board, but then they do not provide information to the board members. They leave them in the dark, and so the board members are essentially just a smiling face, and unbeknownst to them, they're just a rubber stamp to Vancouver police corruption, and it's very unfortunate. In this case, the Vancouver Police Board, who's apparently made up of civilians, there's no email contacts for them, there's no phone numbers for them, so they may not even know that this video of the 3 Vancouver police officers beating this young man up in front of his child even exists, and that we are trying to get information regarding that video, whether the Vancouver police are again enforcing civil orders, which they are not supposed to be enforcing civil orders. I've had quite a few reports of the Vancouver police beating people up or preventing parents from seeing their own children on behalf of in what's called the family law cartel, which is the judicial system in Canada, the for-profit multi-billion-dollar judicial family law system in Canada that's essentially plugging up our courts and is one of the reasons that crime and homelessness and debauchery is taking place on the Vancouver streets, as they hire judge after judge, which is liberal or federal friends, friends of friends, and they make them judges. And there's always a need for more judges because of essentially corruption all through the system, and the family law courts handing out order after order against usually young dads in general, keeping them from their children, and the Vancouver police using their resources to brutally enforce these reckless, essentially corrupt orders that judges are handing out again like candy. I've talked about how I had an order against me, even though I didn't drink, didn't smoke, have no criminal history, yet I had an order on me, and the Vancouver police prevented me from seeing my own sons, which now are doing horrible in life, essentially kept from me through this highly corrupt for-profit system. But yes, the Vancouver Police Board, it's just a rubber stamp organization. And then within the Vancouver police system themselves, the FOI department, that's the Freedom of Information, which is supposed to have transparency and such, they are just ignoring all emails that are going to them requesting information, not even responding, just ignoring it because they can. All right, update to November 10th, 2022 regarding the 2 files. Looks like the Vancouver Police Board, the Vancouver Police Board has made contact now, finally, and they have had this interim, Ted Bruce, make contact with me and try to downplay the file to just saying, oh, it's just an FOI file you want, and we'll get back to you regarding that. It obviously is way, way bigger than that. Often what these organizations will do, where the Vancouver Police Board is supposed to be civilians,
And they'll bring in somebody like a Ted Bruce. I'm not saying that's what they did here, but they'll bring in a professional lawyer. They'll make him intern head of the board until the file's cleaned up and whitewashed. So it is interesting that this Ted Bruce, is all of a sudden a temporary director of the Vancouver Police Board. Very suspect, but yeah, he tries to downplay it here. Very unfortunate. So I sent an email back to him just saying, no, this is way bigger than just a simple FOI request from the police board themselves. Be interesting to see what happens there. The Vancouver Police Information and Privacy Unit within the Vancouver Police has also now made contact with me. I've been making lots of waves throughout government that these people are just ignoring me, and so finally they've made contact. The Information and Privacy Unit within the Vancouver Police is very suspect. It should be not an in-house organization, but it is very suspect. One hand, knowing what the other hand is doing. That's not full transparency. But anyways, they want more information from me. I sent them extreme details. I held some back only because I don't trust that they'll do this FOI file complete, and I do have some of the names of officers involved at the time. One interesting one was a guy named Strickland from the Ministry of Children was somewhat involved, and I noticed he was in the newspaper a couple years later. I believe he was in major hot water. I don't want to say anything about that, but it was something really, really horrific from what I remember. But anyways, what happens here is these two organizations now are going to play administrative games. Essentially, it's corruption, right? It's just a lot of foot dragging. It's a lot of double talk. It's a lot of wording things in certain ways, as the police board has, trying to minimize my request into a simple FOI file when it's much bigger than that. It's more than just simple information. It's supposed to be about dialogue. It's supposed to be about progressive. What can we do about this? How can we fix this? But that's not what it's about. These guys are going to all lawyer up and practice the art of administrative stalling, and nobody learns anything from this except, they pat each other on the back that they were able to whitewash another situation as, Vancouver's eroding, socially eroding. Interesting, they still use fax. The federal government, I think, has even moved on in the last year from fax. But that's another administrative hurdle. If you have documents you want to send, these organizations will say, well, you have to send them through fax, and we know that nobody uses fax anymore. And even if you do use fax, at the other end, that would have to be scanned, copied and scanned, and put into electronic file, thus involving more people such in the office, which would be that's where a breach could take place. Multi-million dollar deals are done via email now. So, this is nonsense that they're still using fax in 2022. But we'll see what happens here with this file and how long the Vancouver police can stall out on this. Okay, a bit of an update here regarding the Trout Lake assault. The three police officers that assaulted the dad in front of his child, and then the separate instance of the Vancouver police covering up the rape of a young child. That was a separate incident, completely separate from the Trout Lake. But yeah, when I watched the video of the dad being beaten up and taken away from his child, I just couldn't help but think of the rape I reported and the Vancouver police that covered it up. So the quick explanation of all these organizations that are just quasi-police and government organizations that pay each other copious amounts of money to essentially whitewash and cover up crimes by the establishment, which is the police. But they're low in the rung. They just follow orders from the upper government. But they do get some joy out of beating people up and stuff. But the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner has now responded. It's the only organization that has responded, and they have
you can see the letter here. Okay, so I'd like to explain a little bit how corruption works in Canada with their writing skills. You can see here that the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner send a letter, it's just a whitewash letter, and it's just legal speak for telling citizens such as myself that report rape and violence rape cover-up by the police and violence by the police, just to basically screw off, like we answer to nobody. The OPCC is made up of politicians and ex high-ranking cops, so there's no accountability at all, and there's so many of these organizations set up in Canada. People are starting to lose trust in government, and this is one of the reasons. So, but they're very skillful at their letters. Well, they used to be more skillful, but they're now they realize that they answer to nobody, so they're even getting a little lazy. But this is the response letter from the OPCC. I'll let you read it. But what they do is they never name the police officers. They never even mention anything about the two incidents that were reported. The police were reported for the Trout Lake beatdown and the Vancouver police covering up the child rape. So in the OPC letter, they don't even acknowledge that was what the complaint was. All they do is they send a email with the file number on it. And what this is, and the reason they do this, is to sever any investigation down the road. So if someone would read all the responses by the OPCC, which is the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner, they wouldn't be able to understand what took place. So normally in school we had to write a summary. So you start out, your first paragraph is a summary of the complaint, and the OPCC should have done this, but they intentionally don't. And this way they sever all the facts out of the communication just prior to whitewashing it. Again, many people are losing trust in government, and for good reason, because the Vancouver Police, the OPCC, the police board, city council members, etc., etc., there's zero accountability with any level of governance in Canada, and people are starting to get sick of it. But I thought it was really important to show the kind of letter that the OPCC writes and how they go about it. And it's not by accident. They are a highly corrupt and highly sophisticated government organization. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about the difference between corruption in what we call simple countries and corruption in Canada. In other countries, we think of bribes. So say the dirty police or the Vancouver police spokesman who lied. If they wanted to cover that up, in other countries there would be a quick exchange of money, and things would happen, things would go away, right? We think of, maybe Mexico, as that's the way that their corruption works, or, South America and all that, in our minds, but, we don't know that, but that's the way we think of it, the way we see it on TV. The difference in Canada is how our corruption works is the money comes up front. So the people that work at the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner and other regulatory boards, such as the highly corrupt BC Ombudsman, they're paid extravagant wages right up front. So it doesn't look like corruption. I mean, like Jay Chalk is the Ombudsman for BC, and the Ombudsman's office I've done videos on that. It's extremely corrupt, like just disgusting. But he's paid $350,000 per year. With tons of days off, with tons of benefits. So his incentive, when he gets the call to cover something up, is already there. There doesn't have to be any more exchange of money, because he essentially just keeps his job for, essentially corruption. And if he continues to do the job the way he's told to do it by the higher ups, then he keeps his sweet $350,000 a year job. So that's the difference between corruption in Canada and corruption around the world. Again, Canada, the money comes up front, and you can go on the website and see, oh look, this guy makes $350,000. He must be pretty good. It almost gives the illusion he's really, really smart and really, really honest, and that's why he gets $350,000. No, the reason he gets $350,000 is the people above him know if he doesn't do as he's told, he loses his $350,000 a year gig. And that is the exact same way the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner works, in that these people make hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars per year to do the bidding of the central government, which is the leaders in the corruption. And with that said, they also pay the CBC and other organizations to sell their propaganda that it's all legit and everyone's happy and these regulatory boards are doing their job, etc., but they're not. They're highly corrupt, highly layered, so it's layer upon layer upon layer. And in this case, we're looking at a month down the road and we haven't got a response from the police board, we haven't got a response from the FOI department of the Vancouver Police regarding the stuff that was apparently released to the news media, Global and CBC. We can't get that information. They got it in like 15 minutes, but here we are a month down the road and we're not getting any of that information. Not even redacted documents we're not even getting. And then we got the OPCC here, basically in legalese, not even good legalese, just terrible legalese, just basically saying, we rubber stamp this, we whitewash this, and there's nothing you can do about it because essentially Vancouver and the Vancouver Police and essentially the regulatory boards in Canada are so beyond corrupt that they don't even care anymore to even try. So again, this should have had a summary explaining the 2 complaints and then a reason. So they did no summary, no names of the police officers, no names of anybody, and then basically in the last paragraph they just say basically go pound sand, we're not investigating, we're going to leave it, put it back on the shoulders of our chief of police who, wow, you can't say enough about how corrupt the Vancouver Police is and how corrupt Canada is, and it's just absolutely disgusting. So hopefully you'll pause and read throughout these documents and just see what a farce accountability is in Canada. And I really believe that's the key here. The major key is there is zero accountability for anybody running Canada, including the police and police officers and people in government. There is absolutely zero accountability, and thus they get emboldened and they get more corrupt and more corrupt and more brazen and more corrupt, and it just grows like a cancer in our society. And then they wonder why people no longer trust authority, and they no longer they no longer trust our government anymore. It's gone off the rails and they don't trust the system, and then they the whole thing is essentially going to fall apart. And I do care, but there's nothing I can do except keep exposing corruption, and but to no avail. It's almost gotten so corrupt that it is now like a freight train, and it's got so much momentum that it's impossible to stop. Like even if someone stands in front of all the corrupt organizations, the Vancouver Police Board, the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner, the Vancouver Police, the City of Vancouver, the federal government, you cannot jump out and say, hey, you guys got to stop all this corruption and whitewashing and minimizing and reducing and covering up rapes and covering up beatdowns. You know, you got to truly investigate these, but you can't. It's just gotten too big, and the government's gotten just too cumbersome, too powerful, and almost everybody in government now knows that there is zero accountability. Thus, they become more emboldened, and then it's just a vicious cycle of the cancer, the social cancer, the political cancer of, you know, that's eating away the fabric of this country. And I just think it's so important for these videos to come out. But I mean, chances are maybe a couple hundred people will even open the video, maybe 5 people will read it. This is more of a history lesson, I guess, because maybe in 10 years, when the whole system falls apart, someone will look back and go, oh yeah, you know, we used to look at those YouTube videos and see the corruption, and why didn't anybody do anything about it, right? But I digress. It is now been about a month since these 2 incidences were reported. Basically, police corruption and you know, beating a young man up and then covering up a child rape. There was even more to that too, but I don't want to, you know, overwhelm the audience. And it's now late November of 2022.